Hello, everyone, and welcome to our very first Yale SOM career webinar for 2023. My name is Deborah Shea, and I'm a career coach in the CDO. So we can all agree that the last few years have been quite unsettled from the hiring front. The last few months, of course, proving quite challenging, especially in tech and the financial services. But today's program offers a timely opportunity to hear about some trends and activities from the executive recruitment perspective as you think about navigating your own search, either within your company or outside of your company or even industry. So just to give you a quick little outline of what our time is going to be like today. So I'm going to introduce the panelists ever so quickly. The panelists will then offer a brief outline of their experience and expertise, maybe 2 to 3 minutes for each would be awesome. I'll pose some general questions to the panelists, and then we're going to open it up for questions from you all. And if you can put your questions in the chat, that would be really great. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce our esteemed panelists. First and foremost, we are joined by Sarah Burley Reid, who manages the asset management and private wealth space at Spencer Stuart. Welcome. Brian Joyce joins us from Korn Ferry's healthcare sector. Yale SOM alumni. Ellen Weinreb, founder of the Weinreb Group, specializes in ESG and corporate sustainability. And last but not least, we have another wonderful recruiter from Spencer Stuart, Anastasia Crosswhite, who will share her expertise in the nonprofit sector. So we have a great, nice, well-rounded panelist group here. So I am going to ask for each of you to share a little bit about yourselves, 2 to 3 minutes, so that the alums can gain a little bit more color and context about your background. So I'm going to start with you, Sarah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Deborah. And it's so wonderful to be here with all of you today and with all of you Yale School of Management graduates. Nice to see you, although I guess I can't really see you, but great to be with you on this webinar. Anyway, yes, I'll share a little bit about my background. So I am a partner at Spencer Stuart in the financial services practice, and my specialty is asset management and wealth management. So I spend all of my time advising investment organizations, executives of those organizations, the senior leaders of those organizations, as well as their boards on a range of topics related to talent. So talent strategy, talent management, recruiting, top team effectiveness, organizational culture. And I've been at the firm for about 20 years. And in terms of the types of search work that I do, I recruit many leaders of these organizations, so CEOs and presidents and COOs, as well as investment leaders, chief investment officers, and leaders of different asset classes, and then people on the business side, heads of distribution and marketing and product. And then, of course, I also work on board director searches for investment organizations of different types. And before going into the search business, I was a management consultant advising the same types of organizations earlier in my career.
Thank you so very much. Brian, you next.
Hi, thank you. Yes, and thanks for kicking it off, Sarah. And nice to be back here. It's been a couple of years since we've been involved in many of these panelists, so good to see everybody virtually here. Brian Joyce, I'm here in my 18th year at Korn Ferry in the healthcare sector and 25 years in executive search. And what does that mean? I work with private equity-backed healthcare services organizations, as well as health plans. I started 10 years on the provider side with hospitals, but more focused now on high growth and the payment and transfer to value-based care and how that's been impacting the industry. So happy to be here and provide any trends and headwinds that we're seeing coming down the pipe here.
Great, thank you so very much. Ellen, you're next.
Right, so I'm Ellen Weinreb of Weinreb Group, and we are a small boutique search firm focused on ESG and sustainability. And I've been working in executive search for about 15 years and in sustainability, ESG, corporate social responsibility for about 25 years. And if you do the math, that equates to my time. Basically, I went to Yale because to SOM at the time. I was interested at the time in going to a business school where I wouldn't be marginalized for wanting to change the world. And I chose Yale SOM because I keep saying at the time they had the biggest, it was called SRB, Students for Responsible Business, which became Net Impact. They had the biggest Net Impact chapter. So that was just, that's how I gauged it, was who, the number of, the percentage of students who were members of Net Impact, which was SRB at the time, was a relatively nascent organization and had a lot of momentum. And I think 25% of the SOM class would go to their conferences and whatnot. And also at the time, I knew I wanted to change the world, but I didn't know what that looked like. And I was interested in, at the time, I keep saying at the time, social responsible investing, SRI, which is really the precursor of ESG, and environmental social governance. And so I ended up working at the World Bank and Nike and Levi Strauss as a consultant. And then got into recruiting because I am a natural networker, meaning I connect puppies to my daughter fostered 12 puppies in the pandemic, but it was like, let's get puppies to owners, right? Like, or husbands to wives. Like, I just cannot help connect people. And that's definitely my superpower. So that's why I decided, I mean, I was helping people find jobs in sustainability for free. And then I decided, well, why don't I just start my own business and be a recruiter in this space? And so I was winging it at the beginning in terms of search. And 15 years later, I do know a thing or two about search, but that grew organically. And that's the sum of me.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Anastasia, you can wrap us up here.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here. I'm Anastasia Crosswhite. Like Sarah, I work at Spencer Stuart, and I'm part of the education and social impact practice here. My areas of focus are C-suite roles in higher education, philanthropy foundations, large national nonprofits, and academic medicine. So I work mainly with clients to find presidents, CEOs, provosts, deans, COOs, CAOs, and board work as well for those large foundations and nonprofits. In a prior life, I spent 13 years at NYU, 8 of which at NYU Stern. So business school education is near and dear to my heart, so I'm really pleased to be here.
Thank you so much to each of you. So I am going to pose some questions to the group. There will be times when all 4 of you can respond, and there are times when it might be specific to your particular lane. Again, I offer to any of the alums who might have joined a little bit later that if you have any questions, feel free to populate them in the chat. So just to get us started, so it's safe to say that we are in a bit of a different hiring environment than we were even last year. And at a higher level, the whole impact of COVID, threw a little bit of a monkey wrench in things. So based on your realm and at a very high level, can you give us an update on where the job market is for your particular sector? So whoever wants to jump in for that, that's the first part of it. And the second part of this question would be, what do you see as the trend, as we progress down the path for 2023? Anybody want to take that?
I can start.
Okay, great, Sarah.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a hard question, honestly, Deb, just because I don't think any of us can see into the future and know what's going to happen. But as far as financial services goes and the investment management industry, I think it's clear that we're in a very different time than we've been in more recently. So the last couple of years, we're just the busiest we've ever seen in terms of hiring and recruiting. It was an incredibly competitive market for organizations as they were looking to attract talent. Many people had multiple job offers. People were receiving calls left and right about new opportunities. So it was a really heady time and a wonderful time if you're a candidate because you had a lot of options to choose from. And in the last few months, that has changed pretty dramatically. Organizations have really halted their hiring. And of course, we're all reading the same headlines across industries, but certainly within the investment management industry about cost reduction, layoffs, and hiring freezes. So it is certainly part of our reality right now. However, I would say that I think that this will come to an end. Right now, the media is having a great love affair with this moment. They love to write about it. They love to be kind of doomsday, all this doomsday talk in the press. But I do think the first quarter will be very quiet in terms of recruiting. I don't think there much will be going on because so many organizations are going to go through a reduction period. And when they're going through that process, it's very awkward to at the same time be hiring. Even if you know you need to hire in certain categories, it's awkward to do it at the same time as you're letting people go. It just doesn't look good, right? It's uncomfortable. So I think that what will happen is there will be in the first quarter, there will be a lot of, there will be these cost reductions. There will not be a lot of hiring. But I think after that, organizations will lift their heads up and start to hire again in select areas, in the areas where they think they have real need. Because they can't stop hiring and there are areas where every organization needs to upgrade. So I think it will pick up later, just a question of when exactly it will pick up. Will it really pick up in the second quarter or will it take until much later in the year? I think it depends, and it depends a lot on the health of an institution, within their industry.
Thanks for that. Brian, you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, happy to add to that because it's an interesting dynamic. As Sarah pointed out, 90% of all hospitals are going to lose money this year. So we have a lot of overhead and cost reductions as it relates to that. On the investor-backed private equity healthcare side, valuations of pre-IPA and public company organizations have been slashed 60-70%. So we're transitioning from a private equity-backed growth for the sake of growing to value creation, profitability, pathway to profitability. So a lot of the needs that our clients are having on the healthcare side are getting creative around increasing the value proposition of the organization, the revenue, the impact, the engagement of individuals, the customer, whether that be a corporation or an individual seeking the decision of their own care. And on the health plan side, it's also a new trend towards value and trying to reduce overhead costs. So we're going to see a lot of M&A activity in healthcare because valuations are down. Some organizations are still very strong. So just to build on what Sarah said, Q1 is going to be a little quiet unless you're in that revenue generating or commercially facing where you can add value and you can help sort of find a pathway out of the uncertainty. And then we'll see some activity Q2 and 3 around a lot of acquisitions and then consolidation. What does that mean? So it's going to be an interesting ride.
Thanks, Brian. Ellen?
Sure. So Q4 was very quiet for us, and we heard a lot about putting the pause on hiring and a lot of what Sarah was saying. However, for the beginning of the year, so our Q1, we're getting a lot of inquiries for new searches, and I do think we are a precursor of what the market's doing. Like if a company is feeling safe to hire again, that means that there's indications that the market's improving. And I agree also what Brian was saying about if you're in a revenue generating role, then that's those are ones that won't get slashed. Like this is the time for hiring for those types of positions. We kind of look at our types of searches in two different categories. One is these investment organizations like private equity mostly for us, and then on the corporate side. So KKR and Bain Capital are current clients. We're doing searches for those in the private equity space. And then on the corporate side, it's like Estee Lauder and Mars and Waste Management are some of our regular clients. And so we're hearing positive things from all of those clients. And I definitely agree that the tech sector is getting slashed and not at the, I don't know if they're maybe at the peak of it, but it's not over. And we're not getting calls from the tech sector to do searches. And then I think the financial markets are following suit in terms of reductions, and probably not at the, or maybe we're at the peak around now. So those are my observations.
Thanks, Ellen. I appreciate that. And it's actually happy news that things are taking a bit of an upturn this quarter, so early in the quarter. So thank you for that. Anastasia.
Yeah, so I would say last year was by far our busiest year in the not-for-profit and education sector. I think it was a combination of leaders who felt they needed to stay through the pandemic to get their institutions through it. Now deciding kind of last spring, maybe it's time for new leadership to take this organization to the next level, next stage. People who were retiring earlier, that a couple years earlier because of the pandemic, and then the people who are always planning on leaving. So we kind of felt like there was a perfect storm last year of that. So this year definitely feels slower. It feels like it's more back to normal, I would say, for us. We've kind of reverted back to normal in the nonprofit and education space. There are still plenty of leadership transitions, but not at the frenzy pace, I would say, that we saw last year.
Thank
We
you.
don't really work on financial cycles the same way.
Right.
So
Right.
I hear quarters. I'm like, we don't really think in quarters.
So, for your areas of expertise, is there anything that you can say that's unique, that stands out, that would be most relevant for the folks on this webinar in terms of how they should be looking at the industry? You had shared maybe some of the trends that you think might be coming, but is there any little tip that you can share about what they can be thinking about, what they can be starting to do in terms of networking, or just kind of corralling their marketing materials, perhaps, to get ready for when things do open up? Is there something unique, though, to your particular industry sector that might be helpful for them?
Well, I don't know if I have anything to share that's particularly unique to the investment sector, but I would say, just broadly speaking, even though we are in a period that may be a little bit quieter in terms of hiring right now, it's incredibly important to stay active with your network. So that means reaching out to people who are working in the categories of interest to you, spending time with them, learning about their roles, expressing your interest in what they do, expressing your interest in their company. It means staying really abreast of what's happening in the sector that is of most interest to you, so that you sound smart when you're talking to other people. It means making sure the materials that you have about your background are put together nicely and really articulate who you are and what you bring to the table, so that at any given moment you can share those with the people that are influencers and could help you get a great job or make a transition that's important to you. I just think all of those things sound so simple, but a lot of people think in a time like this, well, you know, I'm just not going to do much. I'm just going to maybe take a few months off, wait till things get better, and then I'll start looking or I'll start networking then. But actually that, you know, that's not a great idea. You should be doing the active networking and the active knowledge building in an extreme way even now, so that when the tides turn and when more roles open up, you're the first person on everyone's mind, because that you've been talking to them all along and you've shown how smart you are about their area.
I would add to that and saying that you always should be on top of your network and resume, as Sarah indicated. This is a good opportunity to make sure, and I know some people typically have questions in this forum about, I'm using LinkedIn, I'm looking for roles, it's not at the level and the pace that I'd like. Utilizing the recruiting and the executive search arena is key. Finding who that right person is the most difficult navigation for anybody in the field. I would suggest that you likely have had a mentor, or you know some colleagues within your functional area of expertise that had to have been called or engaged by an executive search firm at one point or another. So the warm referral is key here. We get a lot of blind outreach with form letters and standard emails, and the volume has increased significantly. We just frankly don't have the time to engage and communicate and respond. But if I have an old candidate, an old colleague, an old client, or somebody in my atmosphere, my world, reaches out and says, Brian, I would like to introduce you to Susan, because Susan is in a transition, I will make it a point. I hold about 5 or 6 slots on my calendar a week to have introductory calls, and they're typically from warm referrals. They're not usually from just responding to a generic email outreach. So I would advise you to create a target list of companies you want to get into, approach them via LinkedIn. If no success there, who works there? Who do you know from your network? What are the recruitment firms that work with that organization in that space? And just try to find that recruiter and get a warm intro so that you're top of mind. And then we can share it with our practice. Now I've spoken to that person. I know the individual. If I send that person's resume to my healthcare practice, they're exposed to all the searches in our healthcare practice, and that's far better. They might listen to an internal referral. They will listen to an internal referral, at a higher priority level than a blind call.
Thank you for that. So I, as a coach, have met with a lot of alums or EMBAs who are either looking to get another job in their same arena or pivot to something different. And some of the hesitance that I'm sensing is that, well, I don't know if I have as many years of experience necessary to go to a Spencer Stuart, to go to a Korn Ferry. So what are some of the helpful kind of framing that you can share with those on our webinar today about when it is appropriate to reach out to an executive search firm or high level search, and when it's best to just kind of use the network, or when is it best to do both? So is there a threshold for number of years or level of experience to reach out to an executive search?
Go ahead, Brian. It looks like
you're on mute.
Yep, I was about to say, you're in an MBA program, so you've met that threshold. And this is a marathon, and relationships are built over a couple of conversations over a long period of time. The two ways you engage a search firm, you're either targeted through a research and ID through a search strategy of a client that's engaged us, and we're seeking you out for a direct candidate or a referral, or you've been networked into us, and that is ongoing. That's what we do 12 hours a day. And so you've made the threshold. So I would start actively trying to find that search partner. And it's not just, you don't have to just work with one firm too. We're all colleagues and competitors. We're not, there's no overlap on this call as it relates to our area of function and our market. But, you know, there's a search partner in Brian's space in each of these firms represented. And it's behooves you to find that individual and build that relationship, because if a competitive position opens up, a lot of search firms actively pursue that. We don't all get it. Only one gets it. So you never know at any given time who's going to be representing the perfect job for you. But and it's good to have a pulse on the industry and what's going on, what they're seeing. So I would advise to reach out and start doing that now.
Thank you. Anyone else have any flavor? Anastasia, do you want
I was
to
just going to add, play the long game. I think Brian was saying something similar. You never know when a connection you make, particularly in the executive recruiting function, is going to have the opportunity that's right for you. I know in our practice, we really enjoy meeting with people who might not be ready for that CFO, COO job today, but are working towards that. Particularly, I would say people who are industry shifters, you know, people who want to come from the corporate world into not-for-profit spaces. So we enjoy cultivating those relationships and building those relationships over time. But I think sometimes potential candidates don't recognize that it's a long game. And if we talk to you on Tuesday, it doesn't mean there's going to be the right opportunity coming across our desk on Wednesday or Thursday. It could be 6 months, a year, a couple years. And so finding that cadence and that pace and understanding that just because we're not calling you right away doesn't mean that you're not a great candidate and that you don't have a lot to bring to the table. It's just that we might not have the right thing for you today.
So go ahead, Ellen, please.
Well, I'd like to add something about pivoting, because two of you have talked about pivoting. And when I was at SOM, we called it blending sectors. That was another telltale sign that SOM was like the kind of business school it was that it encouraged and welcomed basically pivoting. And at the time we were looking more at like blending sectors from nonprofit to corporate and public sector. And I would say that gangbusters over that last year, we were feeling that as well. And that was a more opportune time, to pivot, like, because the market was so tight, the hiring managers were more open to bigger pivots. And now that the market is closing down and more contracted, they're less open to pivoting. And at the same time, if the market's slowing down, this is an opportunity. If you're out of work, it's an opportunity to pick up another skill, go back to school. And so to put some time into a pivot, like, you know, a 6 months or 2 years kind of thing. And so I wanted to just touch on pivoting via the time, like where are we in time right now and how that might relate to the alums on the call.
Thanks. I mean, there's some specifics logistically about how alums get to you or how alums get to your colleagues. So if there are those who are interested in energy or those who are interested in innovation or consulting or something, and if they want to be in DC or San Francisco and so forth, do they contact your particular office and ask for or look up in the practice to see who heads up a particular practice and then reach out to that person directly? Or should they have some sort of a referral? Would that be helpful to get a little bit more of a leg up? What do you think?
Well, so as Brian said, it's always really terrific if you have somebody in your network who knows someone at a search firm, because that is a warm referral and a nice way to make a connection. But if you don't have that, the best approach is really to figure out who are the people at a given firm who are doing work in your space. And geography is less important here. It's more about who is doing the type of recruiting that's relevant to you in your industry sector and category. And so reading on the websites and doing your research just to know who those experts are, and then reaching out to them virtually is really the best way to start, right? Sending an email with your resume and a few comments on your areas of interest and your areas of experience, and asking if the individual might have time for a quick phone call or something to that effect.
Thank you. Let me throw this out to the group of you. Given that the world shut down for a good period of time and everyone was working remotely, people got used to working remotely, and there's a big resistance to going back into the office, certainly 5 days a week. And most organizations are working some sort of hybrid if they can. What are you noticing in your particular areas? Are your employers saying 5 days in, no ifs, ands, or buts, or we'll be more flexible, or we're seeing a trend where we're having more remote work? Or we want to go back to the way it was pre-COVID, when it was still around, but before it hit us fully in March or February of 2020. What's your sense of where things are and where things will go from a corporate sector and from a nonprofit sector?
This is a big topic of conversation. Yeah, so I won't be long-winded on this. The organizations that quickly pivot and realize they need to be more flexible with a remote environment will be able to retain and secure talent quicker and longer. We have some clients that are unless they, from a policy perspective, have to have employees in a certain state if they're Medicaid, and we can get into all those details. But if the policy and state regulations don't require it, then you have to be flexible. And the clients that are more flexible have a greater success on landing candidates because it's still competitive, compensations are still strong, and there are still multiple offers. So candidates will absolutely decide, depending on the work-life flexibility and balance, what's their next decision. And you want to be in that discussion as long as possible as a client. So they're becoming more flexible, at least in my observation.
Okay, great. How about
I'm finding
go
that
ahead.
I'm finding that the urban centers are requiring 3-4 days a week, and New York, Boston, whereas the more rural centers are more open to, or just like big urban centers are expecting 3 days a week in office, and actually, I'm based in the Bay Area. San Francisco is, because of the tech industry, I'd say is more closed. It's a ghost town, San Francisco. So that's one urban center that's not have a norm of 3 days a week.
Thank you. Is that the same for you, Julie? I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry.
Yes, I guess I would agree. I mean, I think in the financial services sector, in the big cities, we really are seeing people working at least 3 days a week in the office, sometimes 4, rarely 5. And so that would be the general expectation, I would say. My advice to people who are looking to make a job switch or looking for a new position is to really not make that a big topic of conversation, especially now as there are fewer opportunities out there. We find the people who make a big deal of that topic early in the conversation, it's not necessarily great for their candidacy. I mean, sometimes you do need to talk about it up front because logistically speaking, something is or isn't possible in terms of where you can be and when. But at the same time, if you really want that opportunity and you're really interested in that job, you don't want to put any roadblocks in the way, and you want to show the firm that you're really excited and committed to being there and working with them.
Sarah, that's a really great point. Really great point. Hold that one in your back pocket. Yes, Anastasia.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say what we're seeing is completely dependent on what type of nonprofit organization we're talking about. I mean, if we're dealing with a social service organization where the people are on the front lines, then generally even the leadership is coming in a fair amount too. Otherwise, it feels a bit uneven. I will say that other types of organizations, foundations, whether they have distributed teams anyway, all over the country, program officers, we're seeing a lot of flexibility, right? So it really does depend on the industry and the role, right? And how client facing you need to be and where your client base is for these organizations. So we're seeing a pretty healthy mix. But I would say for the top roles, it really is leading from the top, depending on what your organization does and how you do it.
Thank you. So there are those who are questioning how they should present themselves on LinkedIn, especially those who have been going through a downsizing with the company that they've been with. And there's always that prevailing thought, find a job when you have a job. So is the recommendation to leave that the person is still active on LinkedIn, or do you recommend that people say, I left my job in November, December of 2022? What would be more appealing to you all, and what would be more appealing perhaps to a potential employer? And then, of course, to be able to share what transpired, but from your perspective, what advice do you have for those who've been part of a downsizing?
Well, it is.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I mean, it is, of course, true that you're always a more attractive candidate if you're still working. So there's just a bias, unfortunately, because it's not always fair, but there's just a bias against people who are in between or who've been let go, even if it has nothing to do with their performance. So, I mean, in terms of LinkedIn, you can do what you feel is right, i.e. update it with your departure or don't update it. But the reality is that once you talk to someone, whether it's a recruiter or an organization, you're going to have to explain it very clearly so they understand the truth.
I would add to that and just saying that the recruiter, the search partner you're working with, has a relationship with the client. There's a reason why they're doing the work and representing the opportunity they are. They know the client intimately. They understand the culture. The more you share with them, the better they can advocate on your behalf. So, a large rift has nothing to do with personal performance, and it's unfortunate, the reality of the times right now. So embrace it, be transparent, and just also, I don't want to say scripted, but have a concise answer as to why you're going through this transition, what your motivations are. All clients and search partners like energy, engagement, emotional intelligence, and empathy. So yeah, it's best you can be genuine in that and show up in your interactions with search partners, then they will be happy to represent you to their clients.
Thank you.
I have an acronym. We recruiters have an acronym, which is RFL, reason for leaving. And sometimes I like to I ask the candidate, take me through your resume, but a more interesting story is, don't tell me what you did at the job, tell me why you left each job. So what reason for leaving here, reason for leaving there, reason for leaving there. And so that's something to have in mind for interviews as you're preparing to talk. Is to just be upfront about why you left. And we also pay attention to how long somebody's worked at a company. So if somebody's leaving every year, we say that they're jumpy. And so in some companies, it's where there's norms around staying at the company for 20 or 30 years. If they see somebody who's leaving a job every 5 years, that for them, that feels jumpy, where there's other industries. If you're staying for 5 years, you're a dinosaur at that company. So it also depends on the industry.
Thank you. One of the areas that has come up a lot is how to do that whole piece of trying to manage to the AI segmentation. Do I have the right keywords? Do I have the right industry phrases on my LinkedIn or even on my resume, so that when I submit a resume or have my link to my profile, that hopefully my name will rise to the top. Are you seeing that from where you all sit, that you use AI to do at least a precursor search for candidates in a broad way?
Such an interesting question. I mean, I am sure that there are a lot of companies out there, probably some of the larger companies like the technology companies and the largest banks and such, that are using AI to look for candidates online. I'm 100% sure that is true. On our side, as a search firm, we are doing what I would call very sophisticated Googling using keywords. And so we don't have any specific, souped up AI tools that we're using, but it is true that having specific keywords in your profile would probably be very helpful. So, for example, if you are a macro strategist in the investment world or something, you want to make sure that the word macro shows up, strategist, investment strategy, multi-asset, asset classes, equities, fixed income, whatever. You want to just make sure that the range of words that are relevant to your expertise show up in your profile, so that when someone is doing a sophisticated search like that, your name comes up.
Thank you.
And
Anyone
same
else?
with your resume, obviously, not just your LinkedIn profile,
Yeah,
but
exactly. Exactly.
as well. And actually, I mean, we do have the ability here at Spencer Stuart anyway to use our database to search resumes with keywords. So I guess
Yeah.
that is a form of AI for us
Yeah.
internally.
One other thing that I'd like to bring up is the area of DEI. It's become much more prevalent. It's become much more talked about in the employment sector. And I'm just wondering, from where you have been dealing with your employers, what are you seeing in terms of growth or focus in the DEI space with your organizations?
DEI is has been a big factor, and it's evolved a lot and continues to evolve. So at one point, clients are asking for diversity, and then at the and so how do you, and we say, how do you define diversity? And what kind of diversity are you looking for? And it's a sensitive topic in terms of you don't ask candidates to disclose, but you give them the opportunity to disclose when they're submitting their resume. And so we're not presenting candidates by saying we share that there's a range of diversities, there's different types of diversities, and that and it's very important to us, and it's important to our clients to make sure that we're presenting a diverse slate of candidates.
I would add that the larger clients that we have are absolutely requiring it. And if there's not a diverse slate in the finalist phase, then it doesn't allow them to internally trigger an offer. So they went from, at least in the healthcare world, in my world, they went from discussion to now action item. So it has to be documented. Our search weekly update calls, and when we report on our search statistics to our clients, they want to know the complete breakdown of diversity. And if we don't have continual diverse slates, then we might not be high on their list for repeat business. And then that tapers down a little bit more. Smaller organizations aren't they don't measure as much, but it's still a need and a desire.
What about outside of just the candidates that you're presenting? Are you learning about companies who are actually creating a program internally or making this something that they want to put more time, energy, and effort in for their employee base? Are you hearing any of that with your employers?
Yes, I mean, what I would say, I mean, I think the not-for-profit and higher ed sector is probably an industry leader. This is kind of old news to most of those institutions, and they've led the pack in terms of thinking about diversity, inclusion, belonging, as well as building up internal systems to encourage that. So it is more than just building a diverse slate. That isn't enough for my clients these days. They actually want clients, they want candidates who have a proven track record of building a DEI environment where they are. And so we have a lot of our clients require actually a DEI statement separate from a resume or even a cover letter. They actually want to hear from candidates what they have personally done in their current organizations to foster DEIB, social justice. So it's usually the first or second thing we hear about from our clients on the list of what they want from.
Thank you. You know, one of the things that we talk about in terms of resume, you know, crafting a resume and looking at the bullets and so forth, and not to have it be a laundry list of every task that one has had, but to have success elements in there and some metrics, some results. From your perspective, what do you think stands out to you? What are you looking for? What are you not seeing? What really pops out to you when you see a resume that is crafted in the way that you would like it to? You know, we sometimes use that, you know, that SAR, the situation, action, result. Here's what was going on. Here's what I did, and here was the result. So is there any thought that you have that can help this group in terms of maybe looking at how to craft a resume or even their LinkedIn in a tighter and more successful fashion?
Well, it is those keywords, certainly, but it's also the numbers, the R, the results. So it's numbers, like how many people have you managed? What was the percentage growth? You brought it from X to Y. And I think in general, I don't see that on resumes as much as I would like to, or the client, we're hearing that from the client as well. It's like, I want to see what they did, but how they did it and what they achieved. So in that case, it's the A and the R.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just showing where you've had impact. It's really important, and doing it in a thorough but concise way. So it's not too long, but it still, you know, gives the key figures and facts that are going to matter to the audience. And I think, you know, making sure that you just have real clarity around the organizations you've worked for, the years you've been there. I mean, just one really silly little micro thing, but a lot of times people forget to show, like, I've been at JP Morgan for 20 years as kind of a headline. Instead, they show every little job, and it just, you want to make sure that people see you are you've provided lasting impact to a range of organizations, and you've been a consistent contributor to different places within your industry.
Great point. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, I'll just add to that, because we've become cynical resume readers. If you're not saying it, we're drawing our own conclusions. So if you're leaving off gaps and dates and you're adding dates one here, also make sure they're aligned. I get a resume, it doesn't have any dates. I go on the LinkedIn profile and it has every date on the LinkedIn profile, or vice versa. So if your messaging needs to be consistent with your resume and LinkedIn, and yeah, so to add
That's
to.
a really great point, Brian, to have those be aligned, because there are some that have not touched their LinkedIn profile for 5 years or more. So it's really important to have a fresh photo, to have the LinkedIn profile updated. What do you recommend in terms of that about section? Because some of them can be too wordy, too much. Some of them can be more aspirational, so it's not exactly what they're doing, but what they hope to be doing. So are there any tips that you can offer this group for the most successful about sections that you've seen?
One thing is to you mentioned the photo, but also just look at your privacy settings and your email address, because under contact info might not be the same in terms of when you reach out to somebody on LinkedIn and it shows up on the messaging. So there are a percentage of people who don't check those messages, and we do try to we communicate on LinkedIn messaging quite a bit, but also those posts in terms of staying relevant. It used to be that Twitter was, yeah, a lot of people have left Twitter in the sustainability and ESG space. Twitter's just gone down in terms of equal and active social media, and I'd say LinkedIn is becoming continuing. LinkedIn used to be more about your profile, and now I'd say it's 50% of the actual communicate, like a social media communication in the post. And we do searches on the posts in addition to just like the LinkedIn profile. So those are some tips, is to think not just about the profile, but your LinkedIn in general.
Thank you. Anastasia, you're shaking your head. Do you want to add something?
I mean, I was going to say, for those of us who are, in this space, we look at a lot of LinkedIn profiles. So brevity to me is brevity, concise, direct is what sells me. I hate to be one of those people who only reads the executive summary, but if the executive summary doesn't draw me in, it's a lot harder to keep me engaged, to keep going down the rest of the list. So that was why I'm shaking my head, like, just keep it as tight as you can.
Yeah.
I don't mind a little aspirational, like, here's where I'm, where I'd love to see myself, but I do in that section really want to hear who you are and what you've done, and then how that's going to connect to where you want to be.
Great, thank you. We've talked a lot about what alums can do to reach out to you, how best to do that, how to use their networking in the highest way. Can we also just talk a little bit for a moment or two about the misses, what you see as like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that this person did this. Are there those that you can help this group avoid, about what you might see as we talked about the do's, about the don'ts for connecting with companies like yours?
Well, I do want to say, I'd be happy to connect with anybody on LinkedIn. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, send me an invite on LinkedIn and we can be connected there and say, make the connection that we met at this webinar. And in terms of don'ts, I'd say, think about the position that we're in, or it's really the client in terms of what it is that they're looking for. And so I guess, yeah, the advice is to turn the tables and just think about the perspective of, and so somebody who is in touch with us too frequently, Anastasia said brevity is everything. So that not just the LinkedIn profile, but it's also can be communication as well, as to be really pointed. If you're interested in a specific position, how are you qualified for that position?
Thank you.
And also, we get a lot of form letter outreach. So there must be some type of service out there that promises that they'll connect you with all recruiters, but we get the same exact email in such a high volume that it immediately I hit erase. I don't even read it. if I get 5 in a row from the same organization, it's, for me, that's a race. So it's try to be personalized, maybe not have someone else write it for you. That might go a long way.
Thank you.
I guess I just can't overemphasize the importance of being really positive and having a lot of energy and enthusiasm in your search process, and showing how much excitement you have about the field you work in, the passion you have for your career, and the impact you want to have in a specific category. I just think it's so important. People sometimes forget that, like they don't smile when they go to an interview. They talk about why they didn't like their previous job, and so they end up coming across as negative or something of that sort. So just always remember that. It's so important. People want to work with people who are energetic, positive, forward-looking. So always keep that in mind.
Yes, thank you so much. Great point.
One
Great
last
point.
add to that is the client, when they interview, they're always going to ask why you're interested. Have an answer. The recruiter calling me, I'm not looking for a job. The recruiter called, goes to the instant no pile. Really does. And it shocks me. It happens every single search. Somebody says, well, I'm not looking, the recruiter called me. That's a no-no.
Yeah, thank you. So as we wrap here, I just have one more question for each of you. So if we're looking at this landscape, and some of you shared that, Ellen, you shared that you had a slower fourth quarter and now you're ramping up, and maybe things certainly on the financial side and on the healthcare side are taking a little bit of a pause right now, but hopefully indicators will lead to an uptick further down the road. So what advice would you have for those on our call today in terms of how they might be approaching the recruitment process? What kind of advice do you have that might just even a kernel that can help them be more successful in their search, especially during a really tricky time in the market?
I'll come out real quick and say, if you're not looking, at least engage executive search and start building that long-term play, because you never know when you will be looking. If you're looking, create a specific target list of where you want to go, engage in-house talent, and make sure you're engaging the executive search arena and finding somebody in your function. You have to take multi-prong approach across the board and be flexible. You might not want to move, but think about the possibilities. Don't be so restrictive on the front end.
Beautiful, thank you.
My advice is to think about timing, that if there's a period of exploration, to be thoughtful about that exploration, meaning, as Brian's saying, like the list of target companies, the types of positions, what are the trends out there, and where do you want to be? So to be thoughtful about that and give yourself enough time to do that. And then think about, at what point you reach out to certain people in that field to further your personal brand in the direction of where you want to go.
Thank you so much. Very helpful. Anastasia.
I'll speak to, in this case, people who are thinking about pivoting or moving from one industry to another, in this case, to not-for-profit. What we do get a lot is, and I'll use Ellen's puppy reference, I love puppies, so I really want to work for the ASPCA, and that, that's not going to cut it. So if you're thinking about making that kind of pivot and you want to move into a space where you have deep passion for the mission of an organization, really think critically about the things you've done, how they build up to getting, having impact at that kind of organization. And then the other thing I would say that's tied to that is start making connections in that space. Even if it's volunteering, if it's, joining a board of a relevant organization, if you're trying to get an education, see if you can find a way to teach, either adjunct or other kinds of things, because what our clients definitely look for is, okay, they want to change. Do they think not-for-profit's easier? Is that why they're trying to change? Because it's not, for one. If anything, it's harder in some ways, and you get paid less to do it. So you got to have a story. So kind of like what Brian was saying, don't just say the recruiter called me and I like puppies. Really have a story about why you want to work for that organization, what the mission means, and how what you've done connects to that.
So
Those
helpful.
people, when I
Yeah.
have conversations
you.
with them, I want to advocate for them to my clients.
Perfect. Thank you. Sarah, can you wrap us up?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my advice is just extremely simple, but it's to follow your instincts and your heart about your interests, because a lot of people, I think, they want to go into the category that's hot right now, or where, the compensation is high, or where they think there are a lot of opportunities, right? But that's not really a recipe for success, because if you go do something that's popular or hot, but it's not really in your heart, you're never going to be the most successful person. So if you go to do the thing that you love and that gets you up in the morning, that you love to read about, that you love to talk about, that's where you're really going to stand apart from others. So follow your heart and be really honest with yourself about what you love to do, where your interests lie, and what you're good at. And focus on that when you're thinking about your next move.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So to our esteemed panelists, thank you all again for carving out time for us and for sharing your insights and perspectives. And to all the alums on the call, thank you so much for your engagement and for your questions. We really appreciate it. And I wish everyone a very healthy and successful 2023. Thank you so very much. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, guys.